world.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
It's like I've forgotten how to say hello.
Welcome to this week's episode of Life with Kaka. I'm your host and fellow producer, Carolina Groppa. This week on the show, I sat down with line producer Bobbi Sue Luther. She is a one-of-a-kind, multifaceted human. She's loud, she's relentless, and she's also a dear friend. We've done 2 movies together, Miss Virginia, which came out this year, starring Uzo Aduba, and the upcoming romantic drama SYLVIE'S, starring Tessa Thompson. She's been line producing for a very long time, and if you recall from episode 1, Eva Longoria gushed over Bobbi.
And I've been lucky enough to, when I decided to become a producer, to surround myself with amazing producers. Like Bobbi a girl.
Yeah, but this is Bobbi Sue Luther, who you will hear from on this podcast.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah,
So I learned Bobbi is just so great, and I learned so much from her.
Mhm.
She gets it done. And that's kind of like
She's a
her
bulldog.
motto. Bulldog, but like doesn't have sharp edges. She's just like, great, we got to do it. Let's go. Got to get it done.
Just do it.
Just get it done.
Yeah.
And, and she was amazing to watch.
It's funny how mentorship appears sometimes. You just never know who's watching what you're doing. We had a really great time recording this conversation for you guys, so give it a listen. Let me know what you think. Hit me up. Love to hear from you. Let's dig in and hear from Bobbi. Are you okay there?
Sort of. I just need it to brace against something.
Well, we're sitting on the floor because podcast making is glamorous. Just like producing is glamorous, you know? I'll have to get a photo of this.
I actually have this table, by the way,
Do you?
in New Orleans. It's one of my side tables in New Orleans.
Well,
how
there
funny is that?
There you go. So
How
we're
world market of us.
slowly becoming each other. That's
I
great.
know.
Just more of
Just
that.
one pop socket at a time.
Wait, so this is your first podcast? Am I popping your podcast cherry?
Well, I mean, yes.
Yes.
Technically, you are popping my podcast
Yes.
cherry. There's a lot of P's in that little presentation.
It is. It's a lot of plosives
pop.
here into the microphone. Everybody loves that. If you have not been able to guess, my guest on the podcast today is Bobbi Sue Luther, whom I now have known for a year and a year.
Change.
Like a year almost to the date, because Miss Virginia ended around this time last year.
Yeah. It was a lot longer. You know,
I
it
know.
feels like life is going faster, but it feels like I've known you longer.
Well, I think because when you spend 17 hours a day with someone, like in production, I think you just kind of click into this, you lose track of time. You know, it's
Yeah,
like,
you're right.
it's like the days are long, but the years are short. Isn't that what they say?
Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, we do spend more time
Yeah.
together than even my significant other.
Yeah.
Probably more hours collectively together in
Collectively.
the last at least 6 months than I have with my husband. So
That's true.
That's funny.
How does that make you feel?
How's it feel to be married to me?
It's pretty good. Pros and cons. But I lean into all the pros, you know,
Okay.
because I try
I
to
like
like focus on gratitude.
I can appreciate that.
Well, so how does it feel? Like you're away from your family. We'll get into all of the nitty gritty of producing and all of that. But, you know, a large component of what we do as physical producers, line producers is, you know, being in this vortex that is production where it robs you of everything else in your life. How does that make you feel?
You know, just like you like to lean into our marriage by convenience, the pros of it. You know, it's just what I know. I think at this point, you know, I know a lot of my friends and or family or loved ones, or even just people in the periphery. They always wonder how, you know, I can function with my husband being gone. You know, he's a DP, so. He travels a lot for work, and he's been in Atlanta for the last 6-7 months on a TV series. So, but I've been here working, you know, so for me, it's like, I don't know. It's like, feels like 6 months was just like a month ago. It doesn't really register because I'm not sitting around the house. I'm not working a 9 to 5, where I can clock in my own world. I mean, I'm rarely clocked into my own world. So I don't know if I know it anymore. I don't know if I know the alternative. And I think the alternative is probably a little scary. The alternative of having something really structured. So I guess I just lean into the pros because my mind is crazy.
Do you feel like that structure that we perceive that people who work a 9 to 5 seem to have is boring?
I don't think the structure is boring. I think it just maybe doesn't fit my personality style. I think there's times where I crave structure for sure. And I know I function well with structure, but in terms of my choice and my career path, I think that this is, at least for right now, the best choice for me because of my hyperactivity in my mind.
Yeah.
I think it's hard to tame me just in general as a friend,
Mm.
as a colleague, as a lover. So I'm just sort of like, I'm at
There
a 10.
you go. That's
I'm at a 10.
That's the title of your biopic. It's Taming Bobbi Sue.
Taming Sue Styles.
Taming Luther. Taming Luther. It's perfect. Amazing. So speaking of career path, tell me more how you got here.
How I got to producing was really by way of doing other things in a similar profession. I started as a model and then a TV host and then an actress. And so I started in front of the lens and gradually worked my way behind it just by kind of sheer accident. Got an opportunity, did well at it, got another opportunity, did well at that. And I realized sort of the risk and reward of being behind the lens and producing my own content was a lot greater than what I was living through at the time being in front of the camera, which was tough. You know, being an actress is you're holding a number up. You're going into a room with hundreds of other wannabes and you're often a number, especially in commercial casting. You're literally holding up a number.
Yeah.
So I think at the time I was, getting a little older and I was also going through some personal stuff, going through a pretty nasty divorce and just I saw these two things in front of me and what I was faced with my next path in life. And I really was gravitating towards this thing I had a little bit more control and function over, which was producing. So I doubled down on that and left the other stuff behind. And I moved to New Orleans and opened up a production services company and just kind of trial by fire ended up in this career path.
What is a production services company?
It's really sort of like a flow through company. A lot of smaller markets have it. Places like New York and LA don't really have it. But say you want to go to Louisiana and get a tax incentive. A lot of times there's people parked down there to help you sort of facilitate that. So if you're a producer from Vancouver and you want to go and make a movie in Louisiana because there's a tax incentive, they hire you often as like a line producer.
And you have
manager.
to use the pass-through company, so to speak, to get the tax credit, or
not
no?
necessarily. Some places you do. Canada, you do have to use. There has to be a Canadian producer. So often they end up working with somebody like a line producer up there that they can attach to the project.
Yeah.
In Louisiana, you don't. But it just, if you got to hire somebody, might as well hire somebody who's done it a lot down there. And, at the time it was sort of, newer and fresher. It was 10, 12 years ago now. So, it was a different time where there wasn't a lot of people that had done it a bunch of times. There hadn't been a ton of TV shows flowing through there.
So production services company. And how long did you do that before you moved back to LA and started producing?
About a year I was down in New Orleans, maybe a little bit more than that. And then I got an opportunity to be an executive at a company called Smokewood. We had just finished Precious at the time, and we're in post on Precious, and we're starting a new film. So
can you talk a little bit about what it means to be an executive with what you were doing at a company like that, and just the differences of what the differences between that and then the other types of producing that others may be more familiar with?
Sure. I mean, being an executive is just really overseeing everything. And because the company was an independent film company, I was doing all of it. So again, another trial by fire lesson where I just sort of inserted myself and learned on a bigger scale than what I had done before. We were going into production on a film called Judy Moody and the Not Bummer Summer. So we were just finishing, getting the book rights and, finishing the polish on the script and, different versions of the script and then kind of pulling it all together. I was then applying for the California tax incentive. So I'm sort of the person that's facilitating everybody until we bring on the entire production team. And then once the entire production team was on, I oversaw all of that. I mean, I put everything together from the marketing plan to the branded strategy and the branded content. I oversaw, we won an award from the Producers Guild for being the most green set. So everything from still hiring and firing to, some of the bigger picture stuff.
But you were not the day-to-day on the ground producer in a traditional more UPM role on that project?
Sort of was, but we'll leave that off camera for now.
Okay. Well, I'm just trying to for our
Sure.
listeners
Well,
sort of explain the differences between the context of how I know you, which is more as a physical producer, and what you were doing as an executive is a lot more macro.
I think truth be told, I don't know that it differs much, at least in the role that I facilitated for the company. I did all the same things. I think if you were, say, at a Paramount, your goal is to bring in content, make sure it's happening, and delegate it to other people to make sure that that child is going off to school, so to speak. So it's much more in a wider path. But because it was a smaller company, we were only focusing on that film at the time, and then like finishing up a documentary, and then, sort of licensing another book. So it was doubled down. I was overseeing all of that. And that's really where I got my sort of teeth wet on a bigger scale. Did we have more people than I normally have? Yeah, absolutely. Did we hire specifically a line producer? Yes. Did I still do the job? Yes.
Yes, the secrets, the dirty secrets of our industry.
But I think, in a bigger company, your goal is to really sort of, it's mass production as opposed to specific production.
So what made you go from this structured job of being an employee in-house to leaving it all behind and going freelance?
It wasn't my call at all.
It wasn't your call.
The principal of the company she just sort of wanted to take a break. And she was like, I think I just kind of want to go travel and enjoy my life a little bit and not be in production.
Nothing
and
wrong
so
with that.
There I was to dust myself off and try something new again, which was, at the time fine. Then it became scary. And then it was an easy transition after a few years of really hunkering down. And
talk about the scary.
What was scary? Anything new is scary.
Yeah.
And, a lot of times you hear this term in our business, feast and famine, feast or famine, or, there's different versions of it, but it's like that. You're constantly either way too busy or not busy enough. Yeah. And I think with that transition, I wasn't sure where I wanted to go. I think I was really focusing on creative producing at the time. And then I realized I really liked the physical production. I mean, the creative producing is scary because you take forever to find content that you like, or license a book that you love, or find that book that you love, and then fight for the rights, and then take it and peddle it all over town looking for somebody and begging for somebody to finance it. And the risk reward and or the rate of completion of that is really low.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really hard to ask somebody, hey, I need $10 million for this like random ass book. Like, can you help me do that?
And I don't have a famous last name.
And I don't have a famous last name. Oh, and by the way, like your return on investment for making a film is like really, really difficult.
If you ever, I mean, if you break even, if it's a miracle.
Yeah. Half a brain, you got $1 million. Let me talk to you about Los Angeles real estate. I mean, like that's the real of it. So I think after a while of doing that and being let down, I realized I really was more of a function producer. I really like hiring and firing. I really like putting it together. I also like getting a check for the weeks that I work, which there is nothing like that when you're putting together your own project.
One thing to mention here, one of the biggest misconceptions that I know about and through my interviews is this idea that if you're the lead producer on something, or if you're a producer, you're making all this money. And especially when you're an independent producer who's trying to creatively develop something, oftentimes you're not making any money. And even if you get that $10 million and you get your fee, let's say it's $100,000, which is insane. Which is insane. Let's say you get $100,000. It sounds like a lot, right? You're like, wow, to make one movie? Sure, but you at that point have been working for 5 years, probably, right? And you have 2 more years before it. So for 7 years of work, you're getting $100,000. You cannot quantify the monetary sort of assessment of the time you've put into it. So the difference between that approach versus you are the physical producer on this show, you're on for 3 months, every week you get paid this amount of money, and then you walk away, reset, start the next project. It's a lot more tangible.
100%. And I think that tangibility in life is something I strive for, which, going back to the risk and reward and why I left in front of the camera, I liked having something that's tangible. I like that risk and reward, being able to quantify it. And I still have my own projects where I've found something, I'm fighting for something, I'm peddling that something. But for me, I need to have my baseline, and my baseline is safety. And without me feeling safe, I'm not good in life, at life. So what little safety we can provide ourselves in this business because of the risk reward, because of the feast and famine, I've chosen this path, and this path actually suits my personality style quite well. And this path being line producing and physical producing.
Will you define what that is?
Line producing, physical producing. I think it's just much more hands-on in the nuances and the micro of it all. I rarely, as a line producer, am involved in building the finance, though it's not uncommon for me to get involved in that. It's not what I get hired to do. I say it's not what I often do, but sometimes do, because you usually get involved very early on and they become trustworthy of you. And so then they approach you about that being financing. But really your hired function is to assemble, disassemble, manage the finances, manage how this thing that is asked for gets completed and introduced into the fold. I like to look at my job, and even, like other jobs within this industry, as building a house. I'm not the financier. I'm not the developer. Okay. I'm not the architect. I'm not the interior designer. I am the general contractor, though.
And typically line producers are sort of at play at the height of principal photography. You're brought on to prep a project once it's been greenlit, and you prep that show. You oversee all of physical production. Sometimes there's a wrap period, and sometimes there's a little bit of crossover, right, between ending principal photography and editorial and post. Sure. Oftentimes there's a post supervisor, which is a type of a producer who comes on to literally supervise all of post and vendors, and
which is a very slow process.
It's very slow. So it's not for Bobbi Sue. If you know her, she would
I've done it, though.
She would wither and die in that environment. She needs fire in her life. One of my goals with this podcast is to try to define, from your perspective, all of the different types of producers that exist and where they differ, if anything. So we talked a little bit about what an executive sort of producer means in the context of a small production company, a line producer, UPM combo, which is very typical in our world of indie movie making. But will you define what a capital P producer means, what it means to be a producer?
Well, of course, my perspective is going to differ from many, and it's like any contract. No two contracts ever in life are the same, so I think that there's never any true function, that every producer will absolutely do. It's always unique to that project and or that company. Or I think that if you're a producer at a studio, it differs greatly from if you're a producer in an indie world. But my definition of a capital P producer is somebody that, it comes in either at the very beginning or, in its inception and in its infancy, the project's infancy, and really sees that project through and has a major contribution to it. So that's either pulling it out of obscurity and finding that book, and then finding a writer to add up that book, and then getting the financing and pushing it through, and then finding the director and the lead cast and making sure that project gets made. It can also mean somebody stepping in a little bit throughout that process, because that first principal capital P producer their bandwidth can only go so far. Either they don't know cast, or they're faltering at finding a great writer, or seeing it through the writing process. So I think that often some contributors come in a little bit midway through the project, and that's fine too, because their skill set and their strengths are going to offset the other person's skills and strengths. So there's never really a benchmark of when they start or when they end, but there's some sort of major or multiple major contributions that somebody makes to something to basically build that child up, that child being the project, seeing it through and getting it to college and then having it be a big time lawyer. So, not just, it's not just the OBGYN that helps you pull it
out. Or in the case of a lot of indie movies, they end up just becoming like a crack whore somewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
And never see.
It just never comes out of the hovel.
Never, well-intentioned.
It's a boarded up house, and you never see them again.
Yeah.
Well-intentioned for sure.
For sure.
I think that alternatively, people that often come in just for the financing function of it, those are generally like executive producers.
Right.
So they help oversee some sort of major business aspect or major business attribution to it. Help it get distributed, help bring in financing, help get the structure of it pulled together, but aren't really seeing through the creative, the day-to-day, and putting forth some major contribution to build that project up.
How do you feel that nowadays, having so many producers on any given film, specifically because television is a whole other beast, how do you feel like that affects your job or impacts the perception of what you do, or perhaps dilutes the producer role?
I'm not sure that I care. I think that I love giving away credit as currency, and I think that often currency is the thing that independent films lack. And if people need to give that currency away, I know what my form and function is. I don't think it dilutes me. And also, I mean, again, there's usually only one line producer, so
Right.
there might be a billion producers or a billion executive producers, but there's usually only one line producer. Maybe two.
Right.
Maybe, but
On
rarely.
Game of Thrones.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, even if there's a line producer and a UPM, again, there's functions that people service. So I'd say, hey, if that's what the principals want, then that's what the principals get. Because rarely is there too many voices in the room, especially when it comes to the job that I have to do and the answers I need to get. So rarely, even if there is 15 producers in credit, rarely are all 15 of them chiming in on the answers that I specifically need. So it doesn't, at least not yet, has not altered my ability to get my job done. Because most people don't want to get involved with the answers that I need.
Right.
It's way too complex for people who want to worry about like how a delivery was on camera, or whether or not they're getting a credit because they found $10,000 to put towards a
Right.
project. So, from my point of view, more power to it. I don't think it dilutes people's, credit. And
Yeah.
I certainly don't think it hurts my job.
Well, but there's this idea that when you ask, like the PGA, right, to get the PGA's mark, they call around and they say, well, who was actually the producer that would be worthy of the produced by credit? And it usually comes in the form of who was the crew interfacing with every day? Who was there solving the problems, the day-to-day problems of physical production?
I mean, as it should be.
As it should be, right?
Yeah, so there usually is only 3 people that do that.
Exactly. Exactly. But I think people from the outside can look at film credits rolling and they see 15 producers and you're like, what the heck did all these people do?
I think the people from the outside don't even look at the credits.
That's
and
true.
that's the sad part. It's just our own inter-community that
Yeah.
does. And if they're judging, then who are they to judge?
Right.
Because they all know it's all bullshit.
Right.
And, seriously. So I think, to me, it doesn't dilute it. And if it does in somebody's eyes, then it's none of their business, because you're either doing what you want to do in life or you're not.
Yeah.
And it's up to you to sort of make that decision whether or not you want to be one of 15, or if you want to be one of one. If so, then you need to work a lot harder
Yeah.
to not need the other 15 for
Mhm.
whatever reason you needed the other 15.
Right. What are some of the misconceptions you feel like people have about producers and about what you do?
Well, funny enough, I think, and this is actually, I think, broad with most people in our industry. I think the biggest misconception what I do usually is painted more towards like my family. I still have no idea what it is that I
same.
do. Like the other day, my mom was like, so where can I watch the movie that you did in DC, which was our movie,
Yeah,
Miss Virginia? And I'm like, Mom, these things take years to come out. Like, we just locked picture on that maybe 6 months ago,
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's a lifeline of films that are quite long. And I think that even after, 20 years in this industry, people still don't, that are close to me, still don't quite grasp what that is, that length of time. I think another big misconception is that producers make a ton of money. I think you touched on that earlier, especially creative producers. They have to wait years to get, finances back, or even if you have a fee built in, to a Netflix film, you're probably not getting that payout until they've gotten all of some of their return back, and maybe even like their tax credits back. So,
Yeah.
Just because you've got a credit and just because you maybe have a fee doesn't mean that you're getting a weekly paycheck. So
Right.
I think feast and famine is quite relevant when it comes to a lot of producers. Same thing with directors, actually. You're waiting around between projects quite a bit.
Yeah.
I think ease. Even with dealing, most I think crew members respect me and what I do, and they see how hard that say I or we work. But I think that there's maybe a misconception of laziness, when often my hours are longer than anybody else on production.
Right.
I'm going to sleep at 7 a.m. and I'm waking up at 9 to do, or 8:30 to do accounting stuff. So I think and that's AM, like an hour and a half sleep. And that's common, and that's part of our job. That the risk and reward has to balance out, because somebody has to flow through somebody.
Yeah.
So I'm often not getting what's called a turnaround like most crew is. Also, I'm not a physical person like, say a grip is. So I think that turnaround is relevant, because they are scaling rafters and it's important that they get their sleep. No one cares if a producer gets to sleep.
Right.
And that's okay. I don't need them to care. So I've decided to take this on myself. So I think that those are some of the misconceptions. Maybe how much we're working, how many projects we might have on at any given time.
That the conception is that we're doing more than we're doing.
That we're not doing as much.
That we're not doing enough.
Because it's, a lot of what we do is very quiet. It's behind the scenes. It's signing checks. It's interfacing with contract. It's, and then, what people do see is that we're interfacing on set and we're handling things on set. But there's a whole other world that's probably 3/4 of what we do that's not the interfacing on set in front of people.
Well, and it's like for as social as production has to be, right? Where you're interfacing with crew and department heads every day and you're around 100 people and taking on all of that emotional dump. So much of producing is this place of solitude where you really are alone, especially most projects do have a UPM LP combo. And I know we just came off a feature called Sylvie together where we both got to have this really rare experience of sharing the responsibilities, where Bobbi was the line producer and I got to be the UPM, and it was a very different world to have that. So in that way, it didn't feel as solitary.
Yeah.
But normally it is. You're in this back of this trailer at 3 a.m, like trying to stay awake because you're shooting it overnight and you just kind of
running analytics.
And at 3 a.m, the accounting is closed, businesses are closed, so there's really not much for you to do, right? There's like all this other stuff you can be doing, but
you still need to be there.
You need to be there, and you have to stay sort of mentally engaged at all times because at any moment something could go wrong. Yep. And you have to problem solve, and you can't be like, napping in the moho or whatever. You have to be like on your toes, ready for anything that's going to come your way. So, I think that it can be this very, it is when you're not on physical production. I think as an independent, as a freelancer specifically, it is a very, I don't want to say a lonely life because that sounds really sad, but just a very singular experience.
The term is it's lonely at the top.
Yes.
And it is,
Yes.
it can be. And that's with any sort of upper management position, which is what line producing is.
Yeah.
So, the a CEO or a CFO, which is probably more relevant to this position, another sort of like lateral, a general contractor, a CFO. That's kind of what a line producer is.
Yeah.
It's pretty solitary. You're not. It's not about being in the cubicle and planning
right
with the rest of the team. It's about overseeing the team.
Right.
And so there's a lot of gratitude that I get and doing the job and collaboration, but it goes hand in hand with the solitude.
Yeah, I think you straddle the line very well between being a boss and also being, someone who can be friendly and social with your team and straddle both those lines.
Thank you.
I know some other producers won't go out to drinks with their coworkers. They won't go out and do social things with the people that are underneath them, so to speak, that they're overseeing, because it creates a dynamic that can be really hard to navigate, right? When you're in that position of leadership, but then you're getting wasted doing tequila shots with your PAs. It's like, well, it can I don't know. It's just people have different ideas about this. So I'm curious, have you always been that way, or did you struggle to find that balance?
I'm a social person. And I always say, and I've said this to you before, I find that most of my job is far more psychology based than it is function based. I either can walk into a room and read people what they need, or I can't. And I think that's what makes me good at my job. And I think that makes what most people good at their job, especially in this, where you're managing upwards of 100 to maybe even 150 people at a time, plus finances, plus. You're either going to be an asshole and cut off, and that's the way you deal with things, or I hate to say the word manipulate because I'm not a manipulator, but you find a way. Management is a manipulation tool. That's in any
right.
job. You find a way to manipulate a room in favor of the people that need it or for yourself. So I think manipulation can go both ways. I don't mean to sound negative about it.
Right.
You help coax the direction you need the job and or the task to go in.
Right.
By managing people. In terms of, look, our job in the entertainment industry is a social job. We have parties to denote the end of a project. I mean, our project's lifelines are pretty short. They're constantly like, giving gifts and having parties about rap party. I'm
Like,
referring to rap parties.
We just worked together for 30 days.
Yeah, we just worked together for 30 days.
sweatshirt.
We need to have a big blowout party. And so
Yeah.
it's a really unique
Yeah.
profession in that way, where you're having big blowout parties with your colleagues somewhere between 3 and 5 times a year. You
Yeah.
know, for some people, maybe even more if you're like a grip and your lifeline is a lot shorter. So I think it's encouraged to be social in our job, and both as a line producer, but even just in the entertainment industry.
Yeah.
It is a social industry. You've got things built around socializing, like being a member at the Soho House,
Right.
which is an exclusive members sort of guided towards entertainment industry things, where you're meant to pay a monthly country club-esque fee to go
Right.
socialize. So our industry is built around socialization. I don't look at it as, there is no HR.
Right.
While there is a definition of it, and it's certainly if you work at a studio environment, there's probably somebody who is.
Mhm.
And our job as line producers is to help oversee that HR,
Yeah.
as production. It's still, there is no standards and practices in terms of like, no one is meant to socialize out of work. No one's meant to date. And, there's a lot of interdating in our industry too.
Yeah.
I'm married to a DP. So
Yeah. And, a lot of people meet their partners, their significant others at work. It's just that our
when
environments
you're working
are
17
so-
hours a day and you have no other life.
Yeah.
That's probably where you're meeting your social circle, both for love and relationship as well as
Exactly.
friendship, and your next job. So
Which is why I think the whole Me Too thing brings up an interesting point, because of course there are lines that should never be crossed, but there is this element of, there is so much time spent with the same people. I can't speak for offices and studios where it's a different ball game, but from our world on set and set life, you're just in the trenches with people for so long that does start to happen, right? And if a guy is hitting on you, it's always about the perception. Well, if I'm into it and I like the guy, then maybe it's okay. But if I'm not into it and he's obnoxious, then is that crossing the line that in a different work environment, you maybe would take it to HR,
yeah,
and
absolutely.
we just have to be like, that guy's annoying. Let's,
It's a very vague industry in
Yeah.
so many more ways than that are applicable to me. And certainly, again, bringing up the Me Too movement, it's a hard thing to touch on, but it's definitely the term Me Too is applicable towards so many different thought patterns, whether it's, women getting hired or women being taken advantage
Right.
of, or, and. There's a lot.
And we talked a lot about this on our set, and this idea that, the lack of respect and the treatment that some men have towards women, while someone isn't, I don't know, Weinsteining you, like, you're still being treated to be felt like less than at all times, and you have to fight that. And I think women tend to have to overcompensate with their masculine energy just to stay afloat and show the men that you're not inferior to that they're not going to affect you that way. We talked a lot about, like, is somebody who just is very touchy when they speak, like, is that a line that shouldn't be crossed? And we did, actually, it's interesting because a lot of the male friends that we have on shows who are our age or even older, those men never touch you. They never really.
And they're friends.
And they're friends. They never touch you, even if they're joking with you. Like, maybe you get an awkward side hug once in a while when they bring you coffee. But you don't, you know what I mean? You're not getting, like, just unsolicited touches to your knee to bring up did we do this thing that we needed to submit by this date? Like, little things. And it's like, well, is that harassment? No, I don't think it's harassment in the traditional sense. I would never compare it to what some other women have experienced. But
Is it crossing the line?
But what is the
Probably.
intention, right? Is the
Yeah.
intention behind that? And that's the thing that's interesting. And what's difficult is that even us being upper management, women in power, sometimes in those situations, there's nothing you can do. There's no one you can go to. You just kind of have to let it.
Because you are HR.
Because you are HR. You have to
Yeah.
let it ride it out, and you have to keep the ship moving forward and focus on the bigger problems,
Yeah.
because there are much
'Cause this
bigger
problem's
things, so
gonna
you
go
don't hit the
away
fucking
in
iceberg.
27, 26, 25
Exactly.
days.
You have a countdown of the amount of days until, like, okay, this isn't an issue. But I digress. One of the things I wanted to bring up, you were saying that was really interesting. Now I lost my train of thought.
Please pardon this interruption as Carolina finds her train of thought and Bobby pees.
Okay, we're back with Bobbi Sue Luther, who just finished her pee. So the question is, we were talking about how this is such a social job, social environment. And one of the things I find so fascinating about production specifically is we're constantly hiring new people, right? We never look at someone's resume. Rarely. For department heads, yes, of course, there's a whole separate care, but I'm talking about PAs and grips. Rarely, if it's coming from someone that they trust that's in their department, no one cares. There's no background checks. Like, we don't worry about any of that shit. There's just this assumption that this person is a good human. If they have a criminal record, they've handled their shit, and here they are, and we're all just going to work together to make that happen. And I actually find that incredible because I actually have worked a little bit with this nonprofit where the whole goal of it is to integrate people who have experienced either homelessness or have been imprisoned back into society. Mm-hmm. But with film and production specifically, it's like if one person vouches for you, it's kind of all you need. You know, there's so much value in who you're going to be in the workplace.
I kind of disagree because on the positions you need it to matter the most, often it is doubled down on their resume.
Yeah.
You know, so things like a DP or a production designer or, you know, people in my position, I often think that their resume does get them the job and their personality doesn't. You know, I like to say, at least when I hire, the resume gets you to the room and your personality gets you the job. I sort of, if you were good enough in my or my team's opinion to get into the room, you clearly were like qualified enough to handle the shit we're about to throw at you. But then I want to see, do I want to live with this person for the next 4 to 6 months of my life? Because that's really where it boils down to. Do I trust this person enough to do that? I often walk into a position where some of those keys have already been determined without my input, and then I'm stuck with it.
Yeah.
And because I've been very vocal in the past of when I step into a project, I'm like, this person's going to take a shit all over this project and they're not going to be good. And they still stick with them anyways. Why? Because they have a resume and their resume supposedly speaks for themselves. And you know what? Generally 9 times out of 10, I'm correct. Our jobs are, and no matter if you're the first or the last on the crew list, it's very collaborative.
A lot of younger people coming up underneath me will talk about being so gung-ho on working so hard and getting the skill sets and being really good at what they do. And of course that's important. But I always say to them, like, you can learn all of that. All of that can be learned. But what you can't learn is how to be a good, decent human, how to deal with the psychology, the emotional aspects of making a movie, because it is an inherently extremely emotional process. Everybody's operating at their highest highs, their lowest lows. They're overworked. They're not eating well. They're not sleeping. So who are you going to be in those moments? Like I've met a lot of people who are very buttoned up and can do all of the things, but they're like terrible to be around. I don't know.
People with varying attitudes gravitate towards it, right? It definitely is a society in Los Angeles that embraces like egotistical behaviors. It's very self-gratifying. There's a lot of things that feed into bad behavior. A lot of us are a bunch of misfits. You know, we come from different walks of life, different places in the world. You know, it's not a trade, not for many people. There's still a lot of people that are like, my dad was a grip, and I was a grip, my grandpa was a grip. But for most of us, we found our way here through trial and error and through misfittery. And, you know, we're literally a bunch of gypsies and misfits. I mean, who else jumps on a plane 3 days notice and goes off to China to do a movie? Like, people, it's not normal. And that's okay. But I think this profession and anything in the entertainment industry brings a certain aspect. You know, we didn't say, I want to be a preacher or a teacher.
Right.
We say, like, I want to go run off to Hollywood and make movies.
Right. It's a little bit of cray. It's a little bit.
Just a tiny bit. We gravitate towards that. And so with that comes people that fit into all sorts of slots. Highly emotional, highly creative, highly egotistical, highly comforting, like all pluses and minuses were woven into that. We were not all built to just go and be teachers of first grade. But none of us chose that path.
Right.
Other than maybe the studio teachers. But even they're a little bit of a misfit. They're like, school, I'm going to go hang out on sets all day long and oversee kids. You know?
Yeah.
So
that's right.
But so, you know, I think that you have to sort of take it all with a grain of salt and understand who we all are first. Again, going back to the psychology of it. who are these 150 people that I have to look at each day? Who are they? What's their genetic makeup? What makes them up? Why are they here? And then once you realize that, then you can sort of patchwork your way into making it all work together. And sometimes you fail at it too.
Yeah. I mean, you brought up manipulation earlier. And to me, it's like, it's a big puzzle. Every production is a new set of pieces, right? And you have different personalities, and you're like, oh, trying to fit this puzzle over here, this piece here. You're like, it doesn't quite fit there. It looked like it did. The colors were the same, but no, it's actually over there. So it's like, to me, manipulation has this undertone of a
Negativity.
goal, a goal that is selfish,
nefarious,
but we're always trying to corral everybody to be on the same page.
I actually mean it in a very positive light.
Yeah.
Like you're when you're brushing your hair into a ponytail, you're manipulating all of those hairs into one direction.
Yes.
So
yes, but I'm saying I think that one of the biggest skill sets as a producer is learning how to speak the language that is going to communicate what you want and need to that person. What works with person A does not work with person B.
Every project is a different child.
Yeah.
And those childs all have different needs. Some of them have special needs. Some of them, it's they're all so drastically different. And so it's like you close that one door and you open up a new one and you walk into a room and you have to learn how to read it right away. And that goes in again. I always say my ability to psychoanalyze the people that I need to work around to understand how do I speak on their behalf often to get us all to the same goal, without spoon feeding, so
right.
it's collaboration, it's communication, and those two things are the biggest probably components to my job. I think the psychology has to work for yourself too. I'm really good at helping myself get through these really weird times, these times of independence and isolation, what we referred to earlier, because without that, then you're gonna go crazy.
So what do you
sometimes do?
What do you do? And you're
well, I mean that I'm talking about more of like in work and in life. Like I'm just a mess. I'm kidding.
well, no. There's two parts to this that I want to touch on. The first is that there is very little time when you're in production for self-care.
Yes.
And for resetting and releasing all of the things that are getting dumped on you.
Yes.
Every day.
Yeah.
So given that, how do you find a way to do the little bit of self-care you can, to keep going, to show up, to keep pushing through, even when someone is a total jerk, isn't worthy of your patience and collaboration? How do you deal with all of that?
So I think the answer is sometimes I don't. Okay. And I think that there's no right or wrong answer because everybody sometimes I don't even know how I deal with it. So there's two parts of my life. There's the professional Bobbi and then there's the personal Bobbi. The professional Bobbi, for the most part, has got her shit together. I can handle these I'm the best in high stress, 1000%. Dump more on me, I'll function really efficiently. In quiet times, personally, I lose my fucking mind. Okay. And so I try to, take on too much sometimes. And so in my personal life, I'm trying to figure out what works for me. And I don't know that I have an answer yet. I'm married. I'm happily married. I love my husband. So that's great. So that's taken care of. But, how is my self-care? That's not self-care. I work out like many of us do, and I love that. And I'm a better human. And when I do work out, I handle stress better, the endorphins. When I don't feel fat, I feel better. Like I'm more confident. But I still I haven't mapped that out. And I think that my age is helping me back into it a little bit because the older I get, the more tired I am. So I think during the last couple of projects, I've actually found a way to lay on the couch on the weekends versus maybe 2 years ago, I didn't. I would go hike and then I'd go climb something and then I'd go write a book. And then I don't know. I do there was always something, chaotic filling that time because I think that the quiet times are the times where you let the negative thoughts creep in. Mm-hmm. And so I'm just starting to figure it out. And I don't know that I've got the answer for it because even the other day is like the first wrap day. I was like, I said something like, I allowed the door to creep open just an inch. And all of a sudden it was like, oh my God, all these things, what's next? Like I was barreling through and I had to shut the door. I'm taking a trip for the first time with my husband. We're taking the month of April off. These are little things that are monumental for me that I've never done before. I've never told my agents, I am off the grid for a month, period. Not even bringing my computer. And I think that just comes with confidence. And, if after doing 15 projects successfully, you can't look at yourself and go, I know I'll be able to start the next one successfully, then you've got to do a little extra work, because that's what it is. It's all insecurity, and insecurity brings about negative thoughts. And I don't know that I have the answer for all of that. I know that when I'm working and I'm at a 10 all day, every day, 7 days a week, it's exhausting, but I can handle it. But when I'm at a 1 personally, it's like a fucking cyclone going through my head. So I'm trying to find a 5. I haven't found it yet. I bounce back and forth between an 8 and a 7 and a 2 and a 3, but the 5 is not there yet.
Yeah, and maybe you never get to the 5.
Maybe I never get to that,
that's
which
the
is
point
why
of
I live
life.
well at a 10. You know? But it's a constant negotiation, internegotiation of not letting the work life depreciate the personal life.
Do you feel that your professional identity defines your personal identity?
I think so, a little bit. And that's my own baggage. I think that work has always defined me. I've always defined myself as work.
Because what would you be without it?
I don't know, because of the fact that I'm working 7 days a week, 17 hours a day. It is the definition of me. But from a mathematical standpoint, it is who I am.
Yeah.
So it's hard to separate yourself at times. And I find a great deal of pride too. Although I know it's unhealthy, I need to find balance. And that's what I'm trying to do now. I will survive. I will eventually find another job. But that's taken years for me to say that out loud and comfortably just blurt it out and actually believe it.
When we're in those funks of not working and all the insecurities creep up, and so much of our identity can be defined by what we're doing, how much we're doing, and what are you doing? And you finish a project 2 weeks ago, it doesn't matter. What are you on to next? Like I haven't even been able to catch my breath. Everybody's already like, what are you working on next? It's my sanity. How about rest? My health.
I'm actually going to shower for the first time in a week.
I'm gonna get a haircut. I'm gonna do life things that I need to do.
I'm gonna go see the dentist.
Yeah,
because I'm an adult.
That's what I'm working on. This industry places so much. You're only as good as the last thing you did, and I think that's part of why more and more and more we got to do more and more to feel relevant, to feel like we exist.
And it's a funny thing. I realized that on this last project, so many people who ask us that are, and I don't want to say under because nobody's under me, but they're dependent on us working. So they're interested to know what we're working on next because we are a lifeline to them of what they might do next.
I think they mean anything by it, but we get kind of triggered by it. I don't know. Leave me alone. I want to hide. You go into panic crisis mode, thinking feast or famine. There'll never be another job.
Never gonna work again.
No one's ever going to hire you again. Have I ever done anything correctly this whole time? You go into the whole imposter syndrome, which is a whole other thing I think that a lot of women experience. You taking the month, going to go have time, reconnect with your husband and do all of that because I think it matters. And like you said, it feeds into who you are. It's like this cycle. It feeds into then who professional Bobbi is, because if all these other things are happening and they're being taken care of, you're going to show up on sets a better version of you.
Yeah.
And you're going to be able to do your job better. There is this idea of extremes. And so I think for people like you and I, it's constantly about if there is this cycle that is happening and maybe it's like a pendulum almost, can you ever live in the in-between? And maybe you get to just graze it once in a while and then you graze it back and maybe that's life. I don't know.
I think that maybe that is the answer is just as long as the pendulum is moving, it's it's not stationary in one side of things.
That's a bummer.
I'm trying to learn those skill sets. I don't know if it's age. I don't know if it's experience. I don't know if it's tiredness. I don't know. It's so funny. I lost my dog, who's the love of my life, in October. And I was in such an extreme place mentally at that time because I thought all this stuff was happening. But then when I lost her, I was like, no, this is real. And it was almost like her death snapped me into understanding feeling in extremes a little bit better. And I feel like I've handled extremes since then a little bit better because it was no, that is real. That is a real feeling. And I know it's just a dog, but she was my child. So whatever. But it's again, it's just life experience. It's age. It's just living through.
It's maturity.
It's maturity. Yeah. It's more happening and you understanding what that is, the pluses and the negatives, coming off of a bad job and understanding it's probably the best job you could have ever had because it taught you more than an easy job. Right. I love an easy job, but the harder the job, the more it teaches me.
Right. That's where the growth is, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, there's definitely a difficult job that I came off of at the end of this past year. And I got to say, that taught me a ton. It taught me a ton. So while I hated it and I didn't want to be a part of it anymore, finishing it out and seeing it through and embracing all of the stuff that I was unhappy with and understanding what it was and who was causing it made me realize more about my perception as a human and my perception as a producer. So
with all the challenges, what do you love about it?
I think I like the challenges. I think I like somebody not thinking something can be done and you finding a way to do it. I think that that's really cool.
Yeah.
It's an engineering brain of sorts. You know, I think it's like coming up with something so preposterous to happen and to get from A to Z is just like the highest mountain to climb, but you actually reach the peak. And I really like that. You know, I think that something with a continuation and a sense of normalcy, that would be really hard for me because there is no extreme. And for me, it's like, you know, when I work out, I go climb Mount Whitney for 21 hours straight. Like that's like, you know, I live in that extreme. I love like a goal. I love a goal that seems impossible to reach and then getting there. So I think alternatively, my biggest fear is not being able to accomplish a goal. So I'm very fearful. So far, pretty much everything I've set out in my life to do, I've been able to accomplish. Yeah. At some point, I will fail at something, and that's going to be like, it's going to be like the craziest
But you'll learn
thing.
And grow so much from it. And I think,
it's like I've got to be able to embrace that moment.
Look, you're constantly trying and striving, and that's what any of us can really do. Is you can look back on your life and say, yeah, maybe I didn't reach it that time, but I tried. I went and I put my best foot forward, and that's all we can do. You know. Given that, what advice would you have for anyone listening who wants to get into this business and particularly maybe follow a very similar career path in terms of physical production and what you've done?
My biggest piece of advice has always been start where you are. Meaning, if you're listening in Maryland,
that's a bumper sticker there.
So, if you're starting in Maryland, or if you're a kid in Maryland going to school, or an adult in Maryland, reach out to the Maryland Film Commission, or alternatively the Virginia Film Commission, or the DC Film Commission, because there's so many regions, especially in the southeastern part of the country, where you throw a rock, you're in Atlanta. You know, so I say start with where you're from. Don't think that by moving out to California means that you're going to open all the doors for yourself, because often it's easier to step into a door, and that is pretty much in any walk of life. But even in small markets, there is a film commission near you, probably multiple film commissions near you. Reach out to them. Say, I will work for free. Teach me, let me help somebody. Let me donate my time twice a week to intern for a producer, or go be a PA on a production coming into town, or work on a commercial. I don't think that you need to make a short film and put your money into it. I definitely don't think that you need to go to college for it. I think that you need to find your tribe, and that could be a tribe that is very temporary for a time. Take advantage of what's around you, and don't be afraid of jumping in feet first as a production assistant. But generally, it might even be hard for you to get hired as a production assistant without experience, so that's where the internship works out. So I'd say ask somebody to teach you and tell them what you're willing to give them.
Yeah. So, final question.
What's next?
What's next? So what are you up to next? That's great. I'll have to end with that. That was great. But no, the real question is, what is the legacy that you hope to leave behind in this business?
I don't have a legacy desire. I have a personal desire to work as hard as I possibly can and become as successful as I possibly can, so I can make the decisions that greatly affect my family and my life's ability to live the rest of my life. And I feel the harder I work and the more successful I become, the more ability I have to potentially manipulate my life moving forward and making a change. I just want to service the people who hire me the best I possibly can, and to have people go, she's fucking badass. That I was a good person that busted her ass at all times and led by example.
That's a great legacy to leave behind. Even if it's, I think, your immediate circle of people, your community who knew you, and they'll
even
say,
if it just touches one person, I guess.
Somebody said to me recently, it really stuck with me, that, you know, you should live a life worthy of a eulogy, not of a resume.
That's great. That's really great.
And that's been...
Was that on the podcast?
No, actually. I was having a conversation with someone.
I should just say that and be like, I don't regurgitate it.
No, please. I don't know where it's from, but it's
really good.
It's really good. And I was like, whoa.
Will you text that to me?
I will text it to you. And it'll be in the show notes. But no, it's true. And I every time I start in the cycle of like not working and getting into the extremes of all of our thought patterns, I try to think on that and be like, okay, but am I working towards in this moment to the best of my ability to work towards my eulogy and who I'm going to be in this world and the impact I can have in my work environment, in my personal environment, and how I'm going to show up for myself and for others. So
I think I need to check in more in order to do that.
Yeah.
Because I definitely don't check in with myself enough. I
But
think
you're starting
a
to.
lack of self-awareness probably at times.
hey, it's never too late.
Baby steps.
Baby steps. Another great little, I'll end it here. I had a acting teacher. She's more of an acting coach early on. And one of the things that she would say, Bonnie Gillespie, if you're listening,
Ooh.
she would say, it's all hard. You got to pick your hard.
I like that.
It's all hard. You pick your hard and then you stick with it for as long as you can. So
And don't be afraid of yourself either. I think I definitely have embraced who I am through this process.
yeah.
And I think that it's applicable to pretty much any profession or anything you do. It's like embrace who you are and not be fearful of it. But self-awareness is okay too.
Self-awareness.
Be able to check in at the very least.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. And thank you guys for listening. Another one for the books. Thank you so much for tuning in and making it till the end of this episode. If you're still with me and you're still listening, please subscribe. If you haven't already, rate, review, like, comment, tell a friend, tag a friend, tell your grandma, tell, I don't know, anyone you think would benefit from listening to the show. Thank you for tuning in week after week and doing this messy life thing with me as I stumble my way through and figure it all out. Hopefully I'll see you next week. Beijos.